Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar, Unlock Your Potential in 2024 with an AI-infused financial planning and analysis solution. My name is Kira Greenwood, and I'm part of the events team here at AICPA and CIMA, and I'll be your host for this event. We're delighted that today's speakers will be Stephen Waters, Paul Stiles, and Ross Jones from Infocat and Venna Solutions. Before I hand over to our speakers, there are just a few points I'd like to make. In terms of housekeeping, to minimize disruption, you have all automatically been muted. So if you have any queries or comments, please pop them into the questions box as we'll have a short Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. Following the session, you'll also be sent a link to the recording of the webinar and a link for feedback. So please do take a few moments to complete that for us. Thank you. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Stephen and Paul.
Good morning, and thank you for joining this webinar, where we hope you will demonstrate how you can provide a robust SaaS-based planning and budgeting solution, which will integrate closely with Excel, and also allow you to take advantage of the AI capabilities within the Microsoft set of tools. My name is Stephen Waters. I'm the CEO of Infocat. We're a business partner of Venna Solutions. And I'm joined by Paul Stiles from Venna and my colleague Ross Jones, who will be carrying out the demonstration. We're going to start this webinar with an initial overview of Venna Solutions, gives you an idea of the overall structure, how it works, and what it can be used for. And for that, I'm going to hand over to Paul Stiles from Venna.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. And yeah, again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Stiles. I'm a partner success manager here at Venna. So I work very closely with our partners, one of which being Infocat. And as Stephen said, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of Venna, our core concepts, how our platform works, and some of the key differentiators we feel our solution has, and hopefully that will give you some good food for thought in terms of how Venna and Infocat may be able to help your organizations. So before I start, we just wanted to spend a little bit of time framing the value we bring to our customers through our platform. And we've taken a somewhat unique approach in the market by choosing to leverage the tool, the language of finance and operations, which is of course Excel. And our window, or Excel is the sort of window into our application. And our platform, our customers see, three real dimensions of value when using our platform, and having that Excel front end is the ability to dive very deep into specific FP&A use cases. So quite complex. We can get quite granular in terms of the processes that you're trying to model and manage. Also, the breadth of our solution, so a multitude of different use cases you may want to use our platform for, and we'll talk a little bit more about those at the end of the slides, but also the strength of the tool set. Stephen's mentioned that we are a Microsoft-centric platform, which means we can leverage a lot of the investments and capabilities that Microsoft have in things like analytics, AI, and visualization. But before we start, we're just going to set the scene of, why we took the approach that we did. So many people would kind of argue that those organizations that effectively marry data with, the experience of their people are those that are going to get the most value. And in a large part, the CPM, corporate performance management sort of industry, for many years has kind of said that Excel is the problem, and tried to replace Excel with, proprietary applications, grids, processes. But at Venna, we thought, actually they're, trying to solve the wrong problem. And the reason for that is many organizations, perhaps yourself, have implemented more application-based CPM tools, but have either returned back to Excel or indeed never went away from Excel. Many of the reasons you may have returned was because maybe the application wasn't flexible enough to model the processes that you were trying to use, or indeed you had knowledge within existing sort of processes and templates which you wanted to reuse, or such that you wanted to go back to doing things how you'd done them before. And there's also that, perhaps there's sort of shadow processes that sit alongside some of those applications that you've used, as highlighted down the bottom there. And we all know that, Excel, it's known, it's trusted, it's reliable. And if people are using tools, then when we're going to get the return, we're going to get the return on investment. So Vena's taken that approach of saying, Excel is the right tool, and there's a lot of flexibility that you can gain from Excel. So we've really sort of doubled down into making sure that organizations can continue to leverage that investment. But there is an acknowledgement that Excel, isn't an enterprise solution. It's a powerful and familiar tool, but it was never meant to operate at that sort of enterprise level. So behind Vena is a very powerful SaaS database with the ability to, create all your modeling, reuse your IP. It's fully connected to a database which can stand alone as a data source, indeed, for other applications, auditability, security, control, all of the things you would expect from a modern SaaS application, but still with that very familiar Excel front end. So essentially what we've done is turn those kind of two-dimensional spreadsheets into a multi-dimensional, planning universe. And with any modern application, as you would expect, we can connect to multiple data sources, be that your general ledgers, ERP, CRM, operational systems, Excel, etc. We can get to that data, we can model that in our database, which we call CubeFlex, which gives you that ability to slice and dice, interrogate, export data to other applications, etc. But moving beyond that, model the business processes that you have in real time and true modeling. What's the process we need to follow? What's, what are the milestones? Who needs to be involved? What happens if we need to go back and reiterate? We can model those processes using Excel as our front end to do that and really understand where the changes happened, who made those changes, etc. And then moving beyond that, there is that ability then to surface that information into things like insights, or indeed collaborate using tools like PowerPoint and Teams. So these are all the tools that you potentially know and love. And instead of having to learn the tool, we're just becoming more productive. We already use these tools, and that's the approach that Vena has taken. So there's many different use cases for Vena, and often we start from finance-led planning, so the core tactical operation, budgeting and forecasting. But we can also then move beyond that to extended planning, so where you go deep and wide across the organization, look at more detailed planning models, different data sets, different drivers calculations, and moving forward into things like beyond planning, where you might want to look at financial close, incentive compensation management, and other mission critical processes. And this all can be done within the single Vena application, using Excel as the front end and CubeFlex as that back end database that controls and manages that. And just think of any spreadsheet process that's critical to the business, that has multiple layers of contribution and iteration. Those can absolutely be managed and optimized in Vena. And then the final piece I just wanted to mention is we've mentioned it a couple of times, is this tight integration with Microsoft, and we've alluded to this as part of this session. Because we have taken this approach, and because we have a really tight partnership and integration with the Microsoft technology, we have this unique product roadmap, which means we can take advantage of all the innovations that Microsoft is making, especially when you look at their huge investment that they made recently in ChatGPT, 20 billion, I think, investment. Because we've taken this approach, you're future-proofing in terms of your ability to leverage those investments that come down the line from Microsoft if you invest or if you implement the Venna solution. You know, moving forward this year, we'll have our own Venna Copilot, which will be your, you know, your AI assistant, maybe like another financial analyst to add to the team that can answer those questions that come up time and time again from the business, looking at that data set. We can also do other things like, you know, online Excel co-authoring, the tight integration with Microsoft Teams and PowerPoint, where again, Microsoft is going to infuse a lot of that AI capability moving forward. So by virtue, we will just be able to leverage that in our platform. So now I'm just going to pass over to Stephen, but just before I do, you know, our route to market, the way we work with our customers is very much through our partnership with organizations like InfoCat, who really can bring the kind of depth of their experience in working with a multitude of different organizations. So Stephen, I'll hand over to you.
Paul, thank you very much for that overview of Venna. Yes, so before we move on to the demonstration itself, just one very quick slide introduction to InfoCat. We are a specialist financial performance management consultancy. I'm one of the founders. We are very much focused on finance departments. Myself, my fellow directors, and several of our consultancy team are all qualified accountants, so we know and understand the issues that people have in preparing their budgets, preparing their financial results, and doing all the analysis and reporting. We currently support over 50 customers, and we have been working with Venna for about 3 years now, 2 to 3 years now, and what we really like about Venna is its flexibility, is its appeal to the finance department. The fact that we can build those interfaces using Excel, using those easy to use tools, which means that we can implement a robust planning application very, very quickly with very fast time to value, and one which has a very low ongoing cost of ownership for the customer because they can do most of the maintenance and administration, the extension themselves, because they're in a familiar environment. So without more ado, let's go on to the demonstration, and we're going to switch over to Ross, who's going to be driving the demonstration. Ross is one of our senior consultants specializing in Venna and has come from a business modeling background. There's quite a lot to cover, and I'm going to keep this to 30 minutes so we have time for questions at the end. So it's going to be a sort of quick canter through the key aspects of Venna. There is much, much more to the product, which we can cover in a fuller demonstration, but let's just hopefully give you an idea of how it works, the benefits it will bring to you, and how easy it is to use. Okay, so what we're starting off with here is the standard interface into the Venna application. As Paul mentioned, it's a SaaS-based application, so it is sitting on the cloud. There is nothing you need to install locally apart from just the Excel add-in. And we're going to log in. We are going in as a administrator, so we are able to see all of the components of Venna. Typically, your people, depending on their role in the organization, will have different roles within Venna. So we can see those along the top. We have the administrator, we have a manager who will actually set up a budgeting process and the workflows. We have a contributor who is filling in the budget templates and looking at the reports. And we have a modeler who is setting up the calculations and interfaces. We're going to start by just having a quick look at the Manager tab. And within here, we've got various models, and we're going to be looking at our 2024 annual plan. So we're setting up a budgeting process here. And the way this is initially set up is by setting out the process, all the different inputs that need to be done at different levels. So for example, on the left-hand side, we have the more centralized assumptions, the rates and drivers, the things like inflation, growth rates, salary increase, and so forth, the things which will be put in as a central level and then applied all the way down. And then on the right hand side, we have a block which are the individual budget components, which will be completed by the different departmental managers or people responsible for budgeting with each organization. And this is set up by the manager, and we can then set up various controls to make sure that that all of the drivers have been completed, for example, before people start inputting their budgets. We're now going to have a look at the contributor, and this is the person who would actually be inputting the data and looking at the results. And if we have a look at the contributor within this particular workflow, the 2024 planning process, we have a series of different tasks there. There's completing the expense planning, a little bit of what if modeling. There's a review which will be carried out. It says it's coming soon. That's going to be carried out later on in the process. And then finally, the reporting. We're going to start by doing the expense planning process. And we can see here, as a contributor, I need to complete these 3 templates: operating expenses, OPEX, and workforce planning. Now, at the moment, we're working within the main Venna, accessing the main Venna cloud-based application, working from a browser. What we're now going to do is open the actual Excel template to do the input. Now, the way we control this is that we set up templates using Excel, and they are then saved within Venna, so you've got that control and security. So we're just going to open it up, and we will then be going into Excel. And although this is an Excel template, we can think of this as being just like a window on the database, that VenaFlex cube which Paul was describing. And as we go in, we can see that we are prompted to select which entity we're working on. This will be controlled depending on the contributor. If you only have access to one entity, you would only be able to see one entity. But in this case, we can see multiple entities. And one of the things there you can see is that we do have different levels. So we have Amsterdam and London there, Chicago and so forth. So we're going to be entering the data at the lowest level of entity, in this case, London, for the sales department. And once we've changed our selections, chosen what we're going to be doing before we apply the selection, and this will then populate the data with existing budget data that's already been input, and also the actuals data, because typically we'll be loading data from the ledger in the actuals data. So what we can see here is an Excel template, and we have defined this using styles so that the blue cells are the input cells. And there are various ways we can do our input. So we can just do a simple Excel input, inputting the data. See here, we're just going to be going across. And we can see as we input the data that the other formulae, so that the total year formula, the total operating expenses and so forth will update as we input the data. We can also do driver-based input as well. Just open up there. So we can see here, for example, that some of these lines here are calculated. So we have the option of saying how that we're in this case, we're inputting the data at a summary full year total, and it's then going to be spread across the months of the year, either evenly or seasonally, depending on what we select. So in this case, we are going to do the computer supplies currently is 25,000. We're going to actually set our budget at 30,000 and have it spread evenly over those months. Yeah. So we can see we're replacing the existing figures with the figures that have been calculated based on that driver-based approach. Mm-hmm. Now, oh, sorry, Ross, were you going to add something there?
Oh, no, just agreeing.
Okay, so at the moment here, we're inputting our data at account level. And sometimes you may want to have a little bit more detail underneath that. So for example, something which is specific to that particular department, that particular entity. And what we can also do is add these detailed analysis lines, which are specific to that entity, but don't actually roll up for the group consolidation. So we can see here, for example, that our promotions, the total of 7,500, we've currently split it between the half term and Easter promotions. And we could add there, for example, if we wanted to, we could add another promotion, we could add a Christmas promotion as well. So we can see there. So this is great because this is something which if you're using sort of standard Excel templates can be a real pain to actually allow people to have this sort of detailed analysis which is relevant, specific to their particular entity without changing the templates. The other point we can do here is we can also have a more detailed analysis set up in a separate tab using what we call a scratch pad. So we have here the travel, we have our travel line, and you can see here we have a total of 6,105 for the month of January, and you can see that it's actually been made up of a whole series of transactions which are already set up. And so again, this is another way of actually giving you the ability of having more detail underlying those summary budget numbers. And if we actually update those, so for example, at the moment, Jane Doe is having a visit to San Francisco, and we also have here a driver-based approach. So we're actually got pre-calculated allowance for lodging, for meals and so forth, and we then calculate the cost based on the number of nights away. So if you change the number of nights away, or we change the lodging value from 1,200 to maybe 1,500 or 2,000, we're feeling very generous, we can see that the data has increased, we can see that the total has increased, and that will then flow through to the summary number there. And of course, these templates, all the Excel templates, are dynamically linked with that underlying Venaflex database. So when we're committing this data, it will update the centralized data. The updated results will then be available for everyone to look at, giving you that nice, consistent, single version of the truth. Okay. What we can also do, here we've been talking mainly about the budgeting data. We can also look at the actual data as well. If we go back and look at our actual data for January 23, this is very useful, so you can compare the different versions. You can actually have as many different versions or scenarios as you like. Here we've got actual and budget. You could have a revised budget. You could have a reforecast version 1, reforecast version 2. And Vena has some very sophisticated functionality to enable you to set up new scenarios and sort of copy the data from previous scenarios over in a very fast and efficient way. What we often find is that what is very useful is a rolling forecast, which gives you the actuals to date and then the latest forecast for the rest of the year. So you might have 4 months of your actuals and 8 months of your reforecast 1, and then once you move into your 5th month, it will automatically update itself based on a central variable. It will give you 5 months of actuals and 7 months of your latest forecast, and as you just go through the year, it will continuously update that, and which is very, very good for to give you your expected outturn for the year. But when we're looking at the actual data, we see here we've got the summary level. We do also want sometimes need to look at what actually makes up the detailed transactions, the debits and credits, the ledger postings making up that total of 8,641. One of the great things about Venice technology is it allows you to store all of those transactions and link them to the summary balances and analyze them very, very quickly and easily just through a right click of the mouse. So if we just load that, we can then drill through and we can now actually see the individual transactions making up that balance of, I think it was 8,640.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So far we've been looking at the detailed budgeting input, the detailed analysis at company level, entity level. Once we're happy with our detailed budget input, we can then submit that, and that will then update the main model. And we can then move to start looking at the end results by looking at the reporting. And we're now going back to the contributor view, so you can see we've carried out our expense planning task. We're actually sort of slightly skipping it because we would, in the real life scenario, we need to complete the other tasks, the what if modeling and the expense review and so forth. But we're going to just now skip to the financial and operating reports. And as you can see on the right hand side, again, we have various Excel based reports which have been set up. We have comments validation, so all of the cells and all of the entities, we can actually input comments at any level so people can see why the numbers have changed, why the numbers are as they are. But what we're going to look at here is the actual sort of conventional financial statements initially, just the profit and loss balance sheet and cash flow. And again, we've set up the templates using Excel, so we can use all of our standard Excel formatting and controls and so forth. But it is just a template. It's pulling all the data from the underlying database. And once again, as we go in, we have the choice to select what it is we want to look at. At the moment, we're looking at all the entities and all departments. If we look at the entity, you can see we actually have two different consolidation structures here, by the way. We've got first our standard consolidation, which is by structure, which is by the corporate structure, where we're going up according to our legal entity. But we can also have, based on that underlying lowest level data, we can have alternate roll up. So we can actually, rather than looking at it by region or geographically, we can look at it by different functions. We can look at it by group companies, by currency and so forth. But in this case, we're just going to be looking at our standard roll-up. We're going to be looking at our London, which is where we're doing our budget input. So we apply our selection.
We're just replicating where we input it so we can see where the numbers flow through to as well, yeah. I believe, Stephen.
Correct, yes. So we're looking at the 2024 budget scenario and the sales department. So once we've got our selections, we can then apply our selection, and it will then pull back all the data, the latest data. As you can see, we have a very standard income statement, P&L view. We've got the budget for the year. We've also got a little bit of trend lines at the end, those just spark charts with our variance as well. And all of this is pure Excel. But what we can do, we can go down and have a look at the figures which we input earlier for our budget. So we can see there, for example, the advertising, 15,000. We can see the promotions of 12,500, where we added the extra line for the travel. And in the advertising, you can see where we've increased the numbers to 15,000 for our Easter promotion. So you can see it's fully dynamic, pulling data from that centralized data store. And what we often find is that our customers are using the Venner data store as that single version of the truth for all of their reporting, all of their financial reporting, and to a certain extent, in some cases, the operational reporting as well. So it's not just the finance department who are using it; it's operational management, it's the directors, all senior management, the directors. It can be just departmental heads as well. And the great thing about the security model is it's very easy to control what people can see, and what they can do. So if you want your departmental managers, for example, only to see the departmental operational expenses, you can do so. If you want to have your your directors seeing the whole view of the company but not allowing them to change anything, you can do that as well.
And another, Stephen, if I may add,
Hmm.
is the that ability to also audit those inputs. I don't know whether that's something that you can show, the ability to audit that.
Indeed, yeah. So on the budget side, we can actually, within the budget, we have an ongoing audit trail, so we can see where the number came from and who actually input it, if it has been set up. So we don't seem to have we haven't actually got this set up on this template. Apologies for that. I think if we go back to our operating expenses, which is the actual input template, so we can see the original numbers, we can here do call a drill save. We can actually have a look and see where that figure of 15,000 came from. And you can see that was input at 12:55, 5 minutes ago by Ross.
Yeah, and that's where we're talking about this powerful ability to manage those processes, which typically have been standalone within Excel. That ability to see who's done what, where and how, and get that full view of the process as it's happening. So quite useful to be able to have that ability to interrogate at a cell level, where were those numbers derived from, who put those numbers in, etc.
Yeah, something that's very, very difficult to do with sort of conventional Excel, pure Excel-based budgeting application solutions. So within this particular report template, you can see it's a fairly standard. It's one that comes, the layout comes standard with the Venner Foundation reporting solution. We have there the balance sheet and cash flow as well. What we can also do is very easily set up alternate reports which are looking at that data in a different way. You can think of it like a glorified pivot table, but it's much easier to use than a pivot table, much nicer formatting. So for example, we can have a look at a comparison by entity rather than just having a two-dimensional view of the entity. We can pivot that data around and have a look at, and again, this is just a standard Excel format. We are just using our Excel expertise to create this view of the data. And in this case, we're looking across all the different entities and see how they make up the total of North America. And we have our P&L view there. We also have a summary tab there, where we're just using standard Excel graphs, and we're seeing how the split of the different account lines is split by the different geographical entities. Okay, so I'm a little bit conscious of time here. As I said, we just want to give you a flavor, and what hopefully you've seen there is how we can use Excel as a very powerful and flexible window on the database to provide a controlled budgeting input, and then do all the calculations and allow for centralized reporting, controlled reporting on centralized data. So what we're now going to look at is taking that a stage further. So we have our initial budget, we have all our actual data in there, and we've got our Excel reports. So what we're now going to do is see how we can take it the next stage further up to the sort of dashboard, more sophisticated dashboard type reporting. And what we're going to use is what we call Venner Insights, which is actually Microsoft's Power BI reporting tool, and this is fully integrated within Venner. And as Paul has mentioned, Venner has a very, very close relationship with Microsoft, and this has two benefits. The first is to provide a nice dashboarding environment. I mean, you can build dashboards in Excel, but quite frankly, they can be a little bit kludgy. This is a much nicer, easy to use, end user orientated dashboarding tool. It also starts to provide access to that AI functionality, which we talked about earlier. And if that AI functionality, which is native to Power BI, and there are also functions which are native to Excel, if they're available via Excel or Microsoft BI, they are then becoming available within Venner. So what we're going to start with is the dashboard. Just wait for it to open up. And this is, we've moved away from the Excel interface and we're in a pure browser-based environment. And as you can see, we've got various screens set up there. And we'll start just by having a quick look at the executive summary. And this is the sort of thing which you are likely to give to your senior management, your directors. It's very easy for them to access. Got a nice high-level view of the company. We can see sort of the top left. We can see how we are a breakdown of our expenses by different type. We can see the bottom left-hand one. We are showing various profitability measures over time. We have bottom right a nice geographical view of the data, looking at our revenue in this particular case. And the top right one is what we call a decomposition chart, where we can see how a particular line, a particular amount in the financial statements is broken down by, in this case, by city and by different account type. And all of these screens are selectable depending on what you allow people to do. So at the moment, we're looking at all the entities we can go through. We can change those entities. We can change our scenarios. We can change our periods and all our years. So a very, very fast, flexible, easy to use access to pretty much all of our data there.
And I'll just add to that, Stephen, if I may, just on that. This data is all coming from Venner, the database which we've talked about. So in terms of the transformations and the preparations and the hierarchies, the date formatting, the years, the periods, the currency, all of that has been prepared for you in Venner. So when we surface this information, or when we start to build analytical applications and visualizations within Venner, then we're working from a clean set of data which conforms to your business logic.
Yeah. So just moving through those tabs, this is giving the high level summary, and what we can also do is drill down in a little bit more detail and into different aspects. So if we want to just have a look at the purely concentrate and focus on the revenue, we have here looking at it in more detail. So again, we can see here a decomposition chart which is showing how it's made up of different regions and then the different countries within that region, within Canada, split between Toronto and Montreal, and we can drill down further on that if required. In the profitability tab, we're giving a more graphical view. Again, we've got a decomposition chart. We have a standard sort of bar chart of trend lines. And at the bottom, we have a waterfall. And waterfall charts are generally a bit of a pain to create in Excel, but these come as absolute standard within Power BI, within the Venner Insights module. So again, a nice graphical way. And as with all these other reports, fully selectable, we can change our view of the data. Now, so far, the reports we've looked at here are just standard dashboards. And what we're now going to look at is the AI functionality, which is currently available within Power BI and consequently within Venner Insights. Now, I do have to caveat this because the technology is advancing very, very quickly. There's been a lot of publicity with AI, about AI with ChatGPT in the press, radio, television, and so forth. But I bet that probably a year ago, very, very few of the audience here and I wouldn't ever have heard of ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT was created by OpenAI, which is heavily funded by Microsoft, and Microsoft are developing their own version in conjunction with OpenAI called Copilot, which will give you that full generative AI capacity. Not available yet in Vena, it will be available in the coming few months. But what we have already is some steps towards that. So if we start by looking at the OPEX tab, and again, we have here, we're looking at the operating expenses. So we have a little heat map on the right showing how the OPEX is split by department and so forth. But the key thing to look at here is the key influencers box, which we have. And what this is doing is using some of Microsoft's AI capabilities to analyze what is actually causing, influencing the operating expenses. And the great thing about this is it's analyzing it from different directions, in our jargon, from the different hierarchies. So it's not just saying looking at it by entity or by customer or by account, it's looking at it across all of those different factors. So we can see the OPEX, the big factor that's influencing the OPEX is the salaries and wages. But we can also see that it's the entity, 220 London, and the sales department. And if we actually click on, in the heat map, we can just sort of click on sales. And so we can see within the sales department, again, the factors that are actually driving that value, which is affecting the OPEX. So we can see in this case, all the particular accounts. And again, the big account that is driving it is the salaries and wages. So can we, yeah. So what we can also do here, because we can, we are looking at this at a summary level, we might want to actually drill down and have a look at the detail behind that, the individual transactions. And again, because Vena is storing all of this detailed information within the database, we can just drill through to the underlying transactions, which is a great help for analysis, for looking at the audit trail. So we can see there the individual transactions that are making up that total. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at, so in this case, we've used AI to actually allow us to analyze that data and work out what it is that is creating the variances, creating those large amounts. We're now going to look at a different aspect of forecasting called predictive analytics. Now, a lot of people are doing their budgets based on experience, based on rule of thumb, based on expectations. An alternative approach is to use a more rigorous scientific statistical approach and actually look at your historic data, and you can then use various techniques, double exponential smoothing, Holt Winters, whatever, to actually analyze that and split that historic data so you can look at the underlying trends, you can look at the seasonality, you can look at the random fluctuations, and you can then use that historic data to project forwards. Now, this is something which you probably need to be cautious about and be able to use your judgment. So what we find is customers who are using this approach, and it's particularly relevant if you've got good quality long-term data and you've got a fairly consistent sales. So for example, consumer sales, restaurants, selling of products and so forth, which may be affected by seasonality, can be difficult to forecast. You can use this approach to generate an initial forecast, which can then be reviewed and amended if required. And what we're looking at here, we're actually looking at the net income for the companies, and the top box is showing the actual data, but it's also showing, and it's a little bit difficult to see on this screen, but you may be able to see a faint gray bar that's sort of tracking the actual data. And what this is doing is retrofitting our predictive model to the actual data and just making sure that it's giving consistent results. And we can see that in most cases, our actual data is within the upper and lower bounds of the retrofitted model. There is just one point in October 2023 where the actual data is lower than the model would have predicted, but it's still pretty close. So I think we're reasonably happy with that predictive model. So what we can see then at the bottom box is saying, well, let's just take that forward. We have the actual data with the predictive model, and we can then use that to predict forward. So we have 2 months projection going forward. You can see shown by the dotted line with the upper and lower bounds. In this particular case, the upper and lower bounds a little bit on the high side, but I think that's probably because the historic data is not quite as consistent as we would normally hope for. But again, this is using technology to provide a very good first guess at your budget, which can then be reviewed and amended as required. Okay, so the final thing we're going to show is smart narrative. And this is where the AI is really coming in, where we're actually using the natural language interface. And the smart narrative, what that has done is it is looking at the data and providing a narrative, providing our commentary on those results. And all of this has been generated automatically. And you can see it's looking not just at the actual income, but it's analyzing it across the different departments, across the different companies, across the different accounts. And we can interrogate the data as well using natural language interface. So for example, if we wanted to look at our top 3 departments by revenue, notice actually it's the Ross's typing was not quite perfect there. It's done an autocorrect for revenue, so we can see the top 3 products, subscriptions, products, and professional services. And if we wanted to, for example, look at our top 5 accounts by entity, we can do so as well. What are our best performing companies? Okay. So this, I think, really shows how you can move beyond just simple reporting and having to manually create those commentaries to using the power of AI to do that for you. Now, it's not always going to be perfect. If there are people in the audience who've experimented with Chat GPT or similar, you can see that it doesn't always get it right first time, but very often it gives you a very good first stab, which you can then update and refine. Okay, so looking at the time now, I think that's pretty much finished what we wanted to cover in our demonstration. As I mentioned earlier, it is a very sort of quick run through, a quick canter through the capabilities. We've seen how we can input our budgets. We've seen how we can do our standard Excel-based reporting, and then we've got the dashboard reporting, integrating some of those AI features, which are going to be growing as AI gets more powerful and develops and gets integrated within the Microsoft tool stack. So what we're now going to move over is to a Q&A session. So I will hand back to Kira.
Hi everybody. So we've got some questions coming through. The first one, can we use our existing Excel budget input sheets, or would we have to rebuild all of them?
I'm happy to answer that one. You can take either approach. We find some of our so Venner comes with pre-packaged templates which you can use. And as you can see, they're set up with a very sort of specific style. And if you're happy with that, that's fine. And that makes for a very fast implementation. We just have to sort of tailor them slightly to fit in with your entity structure, your account structure, and so forth. We have some other customers who've got existing budgeting solutions based around Excel, which they spent a lot of time developing. They have their own style, they have their own sort of formatting and colors. And in that case, we can just we can just tailor the Venner structures to their existing templates, input templates and reports. And that means that apart from just the general look and feel, sort of complying with their corporate standards and so forth, it can also make it very, very easy for implementation, because if you have a large user base, they may already be familiar with their existing budget input templates. They can just carry on using them, even though they're now tied to that Venner database, all of the controls around it. So you can take either approach, depending on your circumstances.
Okay, and the templates would be applicable for all of the applications that you've shown?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Brilliant. Somebody's asked if this would be able to work for an outsourcing practice to use across numerous entities with individual templates, so different templates per entity?
Yes, it would, because you can tailor. I think if you recall, when we were going through the workflow, the templates are linked to the workflow, and you can have different entities, different workflows, a different workflow relating to each entity, and you could then have a different template relating to that particular entity. So you could have, one template for company A, different set of templates for company B, and so forth.
And I mean, that would be an interesting one to drill into, but then you've also got security that could come into play, right? In terms of one template that could be applicable to all, but depending on the security, they're only seeing one entity. They may be seeing certain dimensions that are related specifically to that entity. So security within Venner allows you to get very granular with what individuals can both see in terms of the data, but also maybe some of the structures within the actual template. So that is something that we would absolutely say, yes, we could do that.
Brilliant. We've got quite a few questions coming in regarding integration. So the first one asks if Venner will integrate and upload to Microsoft 365, ERPs, financial systems, SAP, or external ledgers.
Mike, yes, is a simple answer. Virtually all of our customers, I would say all of our customers, are integrating with a variety of ledgers. For some ledgers, we have a pre-built connector. It's just a matter of customizing. We also have an API which you can use, and you can also use sort of CSV or text files. So the answer is yes. Some are easier than others. SAP is not always the easiest, because SAP seems to make it as difficult as possible to get data out, but we succeed.
Brilliant, thank you. In terms of the pricing structure, how does the pricing structure for Venner work?
Paul, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, I will. I won't go into numbers per se, but in terms of the license types, you have it's number one, it's a SaaS subscription, so it's an annually subscribed to platform, and typically our customers tend to go through a 3-year subscription with an annually recurring set of fees. The way it's actually set up from a licensing perspective is you pay you pay an amount for the platform, which allows you to connect to as many data sources as you like, as many have as many templates as you like. There's no limit on the data. That's your platform pricing. And then you then pay for, there's three roles. There's the administrator, which Stephen showed you, which will set up things like the connectivity, the admin. They will set up things like the business processes, the templates, the design, all of that kind of stuff. There's an administrator license, of which there is typically a small number, and then the larger number of users is what's called a contributor. So that would be somebody who would be able to go into the application, go into the contributor tab, be shown a set of processes to which they are assigned, then open up the applicable template, make their changes, and save that back as part of a process. So that's a contributor license. And then you also have the concept of a viewer. So that person will be able to view the process, view the stage in which the process is, where the bottlenecks are, how far completed are we within a process, but they wouldn't be able to do any contribution. So there's a number of different tiers that are related to that. There's a few other license types, like a sandbox environment, and indeed, if you wanted the embedded Microsoft Power BI, the Vena Insights, that's also a license price. But typically, those in fact, those are the main license components. If you want to talk about pricing, then we can, we can absolutely follow up and talk about that in more detail.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'll just add something on costings. Of course, the other cost is the implementation, and we've worked with various products over the years, and Vena is, in terms of the implementation cost and the implementation timescales, is certainly one of the has the lowest implementation costs, the lowest time to value.
That was my next question. Do you have a rough? That's okay. Do you have a rough idea of sort of the implementation time? So someone's asking, what sort of timescale would you usually see for a customer?
Yeah, I mean, that obviously is difficult because it depends on their requirements and so forth. But we would normally, and the other thing is that very often we break the implementation down into phases, and Vena does that very well. So you don't have to make a massive commitment and spend sort of 6 months of consultants' time before you actually get anything. So we would normally have a first phase, which would be integrating with your GL, building the initial templates and initial reports, and then we work very closely with the customers so they can take ownership of it. And you'd be looking, I say rough rule of thumb, sort of 10 to 15 days probably for that phase one, and then sort of following up with maybe more sophisticated reports, extending it to workforce planning and costs, allocations and so forth. But it's unusual to have, we're very unusual to have if at all, to have those sort of large 50, 100-day projects, which you might get with other products in the same space.
Yeah. No, I'd absolutely echo that from a Vena perspective as well. If we're keeping it quite succinct in terms of stage one, one financial data model, an integration to a GL, balance sheet, income statement, cash flow, a number of different templates, might be revenue, cost of sale, and some other things around security, setup, training, etc. That initial phase is somewhere, elapsed time between 3 to 6 weeks, time to value, i.e. when we're actually going to get something in the hands of people to use.
Fantastic. So we're quite tight on time. I'll ask you a couple of quick ones, if that's okay. So the first one is, are the drill down tabs still open when you return to a report?
Ross, is that something you can answer?
I think the short answer is no. So the drill down, as in the drill down transactions we looked at to drill into the actuals,
yes,
they will disappear each time. So the user can save data in as a contributor, but they can't change the layout of the template, so it appears on their view when they're looking at it, but then they can just recall that whenever they require it in the future.
Okay, thank you. And then let me just find another quick one. Do you have a particular client size that you usually work with? So do you usually work with SMEs or larger sized businesses?
I'll tell you from our experience as a partner, we work from small companies to sort of medium large enterprises, you know, pretty much across the board. So far, we have not yet with Venna worked with a very large organizations, but Paul may be able to add on. That's from
Yeah,
an InfoCap point of view. Paul,
yeah.
you able to expand on that?
Yeah, we absolutely. I mean, it's a sort of maybe a bit of a typical answer, but we can work with very small organizations, you know, maybe, you know, a dozen people. I mean, it's really how many people are working in the finance team who need that ability to, or certainly the contributors around the business, but we can work with very, very small organizations. And we do also work with quite large organizations, some very large organizations in Europe, where we're talking about, you know, multiple hundred sort of contributors into processes across multiple different use cases. So it is a range. It is absolutely a range. I would say our sweet spot is probably in that sort of small to medium stroke mid-market environment that Stephen alludes to. That's probably our sweeter spot, and that's our sort of ideal sort of customer profile. But that's not to say if it's a very, very large or indeed a small organization, you know, Venna's a very scalable SaaS platform. So, you know, we can absolutely address those type of use cases.
Fantastic, thank you. So we have got quite a lot of questions that have come through. So for those of you that have opted in to receive further communications, I will share those with Stephen, Paul and Ross, so then they have the opportunity to come back if they see any. Thank you very much for attending today and for joining us for this session. And thank you, Paul, Stephen and Ross, for your time today speaking to us. It's been a really interesting session. I will share the recording of the live session with you tomorrow and a link to a feedback form. Please do just take a few moments to complete that, as it helps us to tailor future webinars to yourself and your peers. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good day all. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.